Thank you for coming. I'm Karen Malpita, and I wrote and directed the play Prophecy. And that's not why I said that, just so you would know who I was, because it's really my profound pleasure to introduce Professor Noam Chomsky, author, teacher, linguist, preeminent intellectual and moral voice of our time. Noam Chomsky knows more about the causes and effects of American imperialism than any other person alive, and certainly far more than anyone in the government. So right now, when we need someone capable of cutting through the cant and speaking truth to power, we are graced with his fierce and rigorous and gentle voice. And I particularly want to thank Noam for his generosity in supporting Theatre 3 Collaborative, a little tiny theater trying to put on a play about the effects of war that no established theater in this country dared to produce. When I wrote Noam the story of how we realized that we would have to do the play ourselves, he answered, "Why am I not surprised?" And he agreed to help. It's always been my dream that the theater become again a vital part of the intellectual life of its time, and it's a very great honor for the theater as a whole to welcome Noam Chomsky to the stage tonight.
Does this work? Yeah, okay. Well, I'm glad that we moved to a different auditorium, frankly. I thought I could shake off a little bit the emotions and the memories that were brought up by the performance a little bit, not too much. One thing that couldn't help coming to my mind as I was watching it, that I don't want to spend time on personal things, but I've had about 75 years of consciousness of the outside world, and I don't think there's been a moment when, at least in the background and often obsessively in the foreground, was the thought that we've got to do something to stop this horrific war. Too many of them to mention. And they're going to go on. And they're going to go on. We can see them developing right in front of our eyes, unless we do something about it. I'll say a couple of words about that and then turn to you and see what's on your minds. I just happened to have come back from Lebanon a couple of days ago. I was there 4 years, exactly 4 years ago with my wife. We traveled through southern Lebanon, met lots of people. We were graciously welcomed in homes. I gave talks, met lots of, saw the country. It was a moment of real hope. It's had a terrible history, but that was a moment of great hopefulness and aspiration for a better future. A couple of weeks after we left, the place was leveled. That was the U.S.-Israeli war. They operate in tandem. It was a U.S.-Israeli war which essentially leveled the southern part of the country. This time, of course, I went back to try to see the places where we had been, the places where we had been welcomed, the people we had met, some of them now murdered. Places like Dahya in southern South Beirut, which was literally leveled. That's the famous Dahya doctrine that an Israeli general proposed for Gaza a couple of years later. A lot of it's been rebuilt, amazingly rebuilt. There's still a spirit of courage and determination, but my sense is of more grimness than there was before because of an expectation that it's going to happen again, and it might. I spoke to I don't want to mention any names, but very knowledgeable journalists who've been in the region for decades and are convinced that there's a Israel-Hezbollah war coming maybe soon. And it'll presumably be part of an Israeli attack on Iran if it happens. If it does, this time it'll be an all-out air war, which will probably destroy all of Lebanon. And Hezbollah seems to believe, and those who know about it seem to take them seriously, that they have now the capacity to devastate a good part of Israel. So maybe they'll succeed in destroying each other, or something like it. And it could be imminent, and it could be part of a much worse war involving Iran or even beyond. How imminent it is, we don't really know. So, for example, Iran has announced, as you may have seen, that they would send ships to Gaza to join the efforts to break the blockade. If that happens, it's finished. It might turn into a nuclear war, which could spread without limits. We have a president named Barack Obama. If you take a look at his website, I don't know if it's still there, but the website that he put up in his primary campaign, explaining his policies and goals and so on. There's actually the word Lebanon is mentioned once. It's full of effusive love for Israel, of course, but the word Lebanon is mentioned once. Namely, he took pride in the fact that as a senator, one of the few things that he did was to co-sponsor a resolution in June 2006, a resolution which insisted that nothing be done to prevent Israel from achieving its maximal goals in its invasion of Lebanon, and that Iran and Syria should be punished for helping defend Lebanon from its attackers. I gave, of course, talks in Lebanon. One of them was on May 25th. May 25th, I didn't know this, happens to be Lebanon Liberation Day. It's the one national holiday in Lebanon. Schools are closed, businesses closed. What's it about? Well, it's about the fact that in the year 2000, the guerrillas, Hezbollah primarily, had finally succeeded in driving Israel out of southern Lebanon, where it had been holding territory for 22 years in violation of Security Council orders, with plenty of atrocities and massacres. Actually included a number of invasions, including all of the Israeli figures who are regarded as heroic doves, Shimon Peres, Yitzhak Rabin, and others. But they finally left and withdrew in the year 2000. So this happened to be the 10th anniversary of the national holiday, Liberation Day. If you read the press coverage in Israel today, it's full of articles by military figures, other officials, Ephraim Snem, Moshe Arendt, describing how they made a mistake by withdrawing from Lebanon because now Hezbollah is not, they don't talk about Hezbollah, now Iran is able to renew its aggression against Israel in southern Lebanon. In other words, what they were doing in southern Lebanon, driving guerrilla war against Israel, was aggression against Israel by Iran. And that's accepted in the United States. You all know about the flotilla. You know that Israeli helicopters flew over the boats, let commandos down from them. Where'd the helicopters come from? Well, from your pockets, if you're taxpayers. Israel doesn't manufacture helicopters. We give them the helicopters with the purpose of carrying out war crimes. And that's not a joke. Just to give one example, in the first month of in September 2000, just about the time that Israel withdrew from Lebanon finally, In September 2000, the second Intifada broke out. The first month of it was September. It was right after Ariel Sharon had gone on that famous visit to the region of the Temple Mount. Very provocative. And then the next day, Ehud Barak sent a big military force which killed a lot of people. Then it broke out. In that first month, September, there were 70 Palestinians killed and 4 Israeli soldiers, the usual ratio. If you go back to the press reports, you'll find that Israel was using helicopters, meaning American helicopters, to attack civilian targets like apartment complexes, killing dozens of people. It was reported. What was not reported, however, and to this day is barely known, is that just as those reports were coming out about U.S. helicopters being used to attack civilian complexes, Bill Clinton made a deal to send the biggest consignment of helicopters to Israel ever, or at least in a decade. Black Hawk helicopters and spare parts for Apache helicopters, the attack helicopters. That came out right at the time that the news reports were coming out about using them to attack civilian complexes. It wasn't a secret. You could read it in the Israeli press, you could read it in the military journals, Jane's Defense Weekly, you could read it in the European press. Amnesty International had a report about it, condemning it. Not a word in the U.S. press. Actually, one word. One small newspaper in Virginia had a reference to it. It wasn't that it wasn't known. It was all over the wire services. Editors were, in fact, approached, asking them, why you don't run it? Well, you know, that's the kind of contribution that we make to these atrocities. And will continue to. Obama's one of the more extreme in this respect, as in the example I just mentioned. Well, if that comes, that's one major war that may come pretty soon, maybe is likely to come. It's not the only one. The one that's more likely, in fact, is imminent any day now, is an attack on Kandahar in Afghanistan, second largest city in Afghanistan. It's been announced, it's not a secret, that the next major attack in Afghanistan is going to be on Kandahar. Well, the U.S. Army has published, taken polls and published them, so you can read them in the American press, of opinion in Kandahar. That's about 95% opposed to a military action. 19-1 by the tribal elders who've met, apart from the poll, the same percentage say we don't want military action against our Afghan brothers, referring to the Taliban. Okay, that's the next one that's coming. You can guess what that's going to look like. The last attack, widely reported and heralded as a great victory, was an attack on Marja. Marja is a town, small town in the Helmand province, where most of the insurgency is in the Pashtun areas. Marja was finally conquered after a couple of days of pretty bitter fighting. As you may have seen, a few days after that, the commander, I think Lieutenant General or something, forgot his name, had an interview in the press in which he said, we've got to revise our notion of enemy. He said, we were thinking we were going to drive the enemy out of Marja, but now we understand that the people of Marja support the enemy. So we've got to recalibrate and think some other way of talking about who the enemy is. This is very reminiscent of earlier counterinsurgency wars. In fact, you could have read the same in Pravda in the 1980s. And you could have read the same in the United States in the 1960s, where it was written. So, for example, in, must have been 1965, the leading U.S. government scholar, Douglas Pike, wrote a book about the Viet Cong Viet Cong is a derogatory term invented by U.S. propaganda for the National Liberation Front, the Southern Resistance. And he described how difficult the U.S. goals are going to be in South Vietnam. He said the problem we face is that the Viet Cong are the only mass-based political force in South Vietnam, and to try to confront them, say, by political means, would be like a minnow confronting a whale, our clients being the minnow, them being the whale. So therefore, the only thing we can do is to reconstruct the war so that it's not the kind they want, a political war, but it's the kind we're good at, a military war. So we prefer our comparative advantage, which is violence. And we have to do that because there's no other way for a minnow to deal with a whale. And in fact, that's the main principle of the famous COIN, as it's now called, counterinsurgency doctrine, which is, the wonderful new theory that we're supposed to be dedicated to. And yeah, if you're fighting wars in other people's countries, you're constantly faced with that. It's not the United States that invented it, or the Russians, or the British could have told you the same thing, the French, the Germans, in fact, as far back as you go, the Romans, the Greeks. Well, that's the prospect we're looking at. And for whatever years I have left, I don't expect them to be different from the past 75 of consciousness, unless something very significant happens here, at least a willingness to face the reality of these actions. I'll stop there and turn to you.
So if you would like to ask a question or say something, raise your hand and you'll get a microphone.
Do you think that if Barack Obama is elected for a second term, you will see him go more to the right?
He'll move even more to the right?
Yes.
It's hard to know. I mean, take, say, George Bush. Bush's second term was considerably more centrist than his first term. First term was abrasive, aggressive, brazen. I mean, he basically, literally, he and Colin Powell and the rest told Europeans, literally, you either do what we say or you're irrelevant. And we don't care about you. We make history was one of their famous words. We don't care. You guys, the reporters, you can report history, but we make it. And they went ahead and made it, like in Iraq, for example. That term dropped U.S. prestige to its lowest point in history. The U.S. became one of the most hated countries in the world and feared countries in the world. And it led to quite considerable internal criticism right within the establishment. Well, the second Bush term was more moderate, moved more toward the center. They kicked out some of the most outlandish figures, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, a couple others. Couldn't get rid of Dick Cheney because he basically was the administration, but the others, a lot of the others went. And it was more of a familiar kind of what we call centrist administration. And Obama's pretty much following the policies of the second Bush administration. What he would do in the next term, if he has another term, I don't know how to predict. Depends on the world situation. You just can't tell. I mean, take, say, Kennedy. There's a lot of propaganda, is what it amounts to, about how if Kennedy had not been assassinated, all kind of wonderful things would have happened. He was planning this, that, and the other. He was going to get us out of Vietnam. He was going to make peace in the world, and so on. The evidence for that is zero. I mean, on Vietnam, for example, there's a massive evidence. And what it shows is he was sort of toward the hawkish end of the administration. He was willing to tolerate McNamara's proposals for slow withdrawal from Vietnam, but always with a qualification after victory. Never departed from that. So, yeah, after victory. And in fact, the people in his administration, like McNamara, who were the most committed to withdrawal, we know what they did when the situation changed. After there was a kind of period of optimism about victory in 1963, by 1964 it was clear that that was a fantasy. So then we get Douglas Pike and the policies that went along with it. And I don't see the slightest reason to doubt that Kennedy would have done the same thing. And political leaders operate within a pretty narrow framework, which is set by external factors, power systems of various kinds, mostly domestic concentration of economic power. And there's a difference between them. They're not identical, but I don't think that these differences are very predictable. So, for example, in many ways, Richard Nixon was the last liberal president. That's literally true if you look at his policies.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you what you see, whether the financial crisis has had any effect on the level of aggressiveness of the Obama administration.
Well, it's going to have some effect. Look at the famous we're now, the current propaganda is we have to be obsessed with the deficit. Okay, that's coming from people like the Peter Peterson Institute and others who are, just dying to get rid of Social Security and other benefits that they hate. So we have to concentrate on the deficit. Actually, it's a pretty dumb idea. You should have a deficit during a recession. You should have a bigger deficit to stimulate growth and so on, but put that aside. What's the deficit? Take a look at it. About half the deficit is military spending, which is going up under Obama. In fact, it's the most military spending of any president in his first term, not relative to GDP, but absolutely. Well, that's roughly half the deficit. So if anyone's going to deal with the deficit, they're going to have to do something with that. And of course, that would mean cutting back on adventurism overseas. The United States is spending approximately as much on the military as the rest of the world combined. And it's technologically far more advanced and going into areas that other countries can't even dream about, and in fact are trying to prevent, like space, war using space for military purposes. And there's all kind of other grotesque ideas on the drawing board, like take drones, which are the exciting new technology. There are now plans for developing drones with nanotechnology, which allows theoretically a lot more flexibility, and having them range from massive drones which can carry out vast destruction to drones for targeted assassinations, which have just been condemned by Philip Alston, who's one of the leading specialists on international human rights, down to drones which can get into your living room and kill particular tiny drones that'll be able to penetrate small living spaces and kill people suspected of this, that, or the other thing. Well, all of this is extremely expensive, and that's plus the 800 or so military bases around the world. And the Obama administration is very much committed to those. I mean, they practically overthrew the government of Japan just recently. It's a big country because the prime minister of Japan had been elected on a campaign promise to Hatayama to close down the military base in Okinawa. The people of Okinawa have been struggling to get that base out of there for decades. And the Japanese government finally agreed to try to do it. But the Obama administration put its foot down with a major power play, and Hatayama had to resign. That's an indication of how power works and what the plans are. So yeah, if there's going to be any effort to deal with the growing deficit, a serious effort, that's what it'll have to concentrate on. Now, it's not going to. Obama has a commission, as you know, that's supposed to deal with the deficit. But there's every likelihood that that commission, if you just took a look at the way it's constituted, is going to go after benefits, like Social Security, which isn't an economic problem at all, but is hated by elites. They've been trying to get rid of it for years. although it's in pretty good shape fiscally. So they're going to go after that. They're going to have to go after Medicare benefits and so on. But nobody's talking about doing anything about the military, which keeps expanding. But yeah, that's going to be a constraint at some point. You know, you can't go on like that forever. Actually, the other half of the deficit is mostly medical expenses due to the completely dysfunctional U.S. medical system, which has not been improved in its most dysfunctional aspect by Obama's healthcare reform. I mean, healthcare reform had a few good things in it, but it didn't touch the main part, which is the incredible expense of the system. It's about twice the per capita expense of comparable countries, and outcomes are down toward the bottom. So, for example, Amnesty International just put out a report on maternal deaths during childbirth. The United States is worse than Greece. You know, I mean, it's despite twice as high per capita expenses as anybody. One of these studies, global studies, it compared many countries, among them Cuba and the United States. Cuba has approximately the same health outcomes as the United States at 5% of the expense per capita. Well, none of this is touched in Obama's healthcare reform. This is the only country in the world, as far as I know, where the government is barred by law from negotiating drug prices. They can do it in the Veterans Administration, so their prices are sort of reasonable, but Medicare can't do it. So of course drug prices are 2 or 3 times as high as anywhere else. Obama insisted on that. He made a promise to the drug companies that wouldn't be touched, over the objection of 85% of the population, according to polls at the time. All right, that's not touched. The privatized and virtually unregulated insurance basis for the system is extremely expensive, and that's not touched. In fact, as you know, Obama killed even the public option over the objection of probably 2/3 of the population. So these things are just, that's holy territory. Financial institutions are far too powerful in dominating the government for there to be any real progress on this, unless we move towards a functioning democracy. But what the point you make is correct. There is a conflict coming up between a financial crisis, which is going to stay. It's not going away. Unemployment's going to be very high for a long. It's not just a financial crisis. It's a general economic crisis. Unemployment is extremely high. No indication that it's going to reduce. In fact, the economists are now recalculating what's called